think I'm going to obviously follow the same format that my colleagues have followed, and I didn't make the second forum, but I was here at the first one that Brian chaired. We'll try to keep it right to about an hour. I'll try to call on every person at least once prior to calling on the same person to speak again. So whether there's comments or questions, whenever you're ready, we'll get them answered or addressed. For a little history, real quick, we've been working on this. Myself included, for the last year that I've been on board. My colleagues, along with Howard Rhodes, who is the chairman of the Commission on Disability, has been working on this for far longer. We have an article at town meeting on May 23rd that was unanimously supported by the Board of Selectmen. We expect some healthy debate, and that's why these forums are so important, so that we know where people are and any questions or concerns they have. So with that, if there's any questions or concerns, please raise your hand and we'll get you recognized. Tom.
Hi. I'm wondering, it's been stated that other alternatives have been investigated, and yet nothing has been published about what those alternative options could be. Is there any data on that? Or can we expect to receive that data before the town meeting on the 23rd so that we can make more of an informed decision? Also, details about this proposal are very ambiguous to this point, and a lot is missing.
Sure. You want to start off, Howard?
Donna, thank you very much for that question. Oh, hi, Howard Rhodes, Chairman of the Commission on Disability. Donna, we talked about this last night. There was extensive due diligence. Came out, and again, I'll show you these. Their numbers came out to be very, very similar. Rick can speak to this, and like $240,000. But they had the major disadvantage that they would not be eligible for the $75,000 Chinook grant because it wouldn't connect into other health services in and around Boston. The additional issue was we're hopeful that the MWRTA, working with the legislature, will find monies to subsidize the cost here within Milford, and Transaction Associates wouldn't be associated with that because the monies would flow through the MWRTA. Additionally, I had long conversations with Vendetti. Mr. Tony knows Vendetti. Vendetti is a service provider for the hospital, and Vendetti, as much as they wanted to do it, said they're not capable of doing a 13-hour, 5-day-a-week program, and tried very hard to figure out how they could do it, but decided to decline. I also had a long discussion with Valley Transport, which is the provider of services for the senior center, which also said they couldn't provide a 13-hour, 5-day-a-week program. So those were the four identified. I could not find anyone else that could approximate the service that the MWRTA provided. I'll leave it with the statement that at $175,000, that is the very best deal that we as a community could possibly find at this point. As I'm sure Will can talk to, or the other selectmen can talk to, we certainly have every belief that over time that number is actually going to go down as we find support in the legislature. Okay? So I'll gladly get you the detail on the in-house. There wasn't much written about Transaction Associates as soon as we realized that they didn't meet the criteria, and the other two were just phone calls. So I can give you the in-house so you can have a direct comparison to that. Does that answer your question?
In part. So you said, for example, that Valley Transport couldn't run 65 hours a week and 13 hours a day, 5 days a week. but what could they offer? And what about van versus bus? Was BHT investigated? For example, Cape Cod has the bus run that goes from the Cape to the Boston hospitals, and they've been contacted.
I did call Cape Cod, and the reason why I didn't bring it up is that was an immediate here outside of their service area. And with regard to Valley, was it Valley or Vendetta? One of the two also indicated that they couldn't provide a backup bus for the guarantee of a handicap accessible. So for those reasons, and for others, neither Valley nor Vendetta could provide it. And believe me, Donna, if I could have found a less expensive method, people on this group know me to be very frugal. If I could have found a way to do this less expensively, we would be doing it that way. And I just want to give you that absolute assurance that we are not spending any more money on this than we absolutely, minimum required. And I hope that's good enough. I really do.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't we currently using Valley Transport for the senior center van? No?
No, travelers.
Travelers, I'm sorry, I meant travelers.
Okay, but I think that I do believe they're kind of one and the same or affiliated with each other, but we currently have a handicap accessible van that is in use.
And again, I spoke to travelers, I didn't mean Valley, travelers, again, they declined even consider it because they couldn't do the 13-hour-a-day service that we wanted.
I guess one of my concerns is that as a town meeting member, it feels like I'm painted into a corner that, here is the only option for public transportation in Milford. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling. And I'm struggling with being able to vote in good conscience to support this without having all of the details outlined and no other options presented.
Donna, I know you're new to town meeting. We started on this back in 2014, and it began with a proposal to the Board of Selectmen. And every couple of months, I would make a presentation to the Board of Selectmen, and they would give me further guidance and further refinement and further direction. And while I know you didn't see it, and you're new, I think you can have trust in the Board of Selectmen that they guided this decision from 2 years ago. And I'm sure, Brian and everyone would strongly agree with that statement. But I also understand that if, this is not something for you at this time, Donna, it's your vote, and you have to vote your good conscience. Okay? In a matter of time, can we just get on to? Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna.
Thank you, Howard. Yes.
Hi, I have a few concerns about beyond the price that we're asking town meeting members to allocate for this, which is $250,000. That's what you're asking us to vote on. So I have a couple of concerns. One is for people to really have realistic expectations of this service. It is and somewhat portrayed as a public transportation system. It is public in that the town will be using it and anybody can use the bus. But to portray it as a public transportation system is, in my opinion, somewhat disingenuous, because if you've ever grown up in an area, which I did, with public transportation, if you missed the bus, there was another one coming 5 minutes later. If you missed the bus, you didn't have to really worry too much. Yes, you had to walk to the bus. Yes, you might have to wait out in the rain, as Bill suggested last night. But you knew there was a bus coming very shortly. This is one bus traveling the same route within town. And so people's expectations can't be that they can jump on the bus, go to Hanford and get home, or jump on the bus and go to the hospital and come home in a realistic time frame. That bus is not huge. It could be full at any time. So I think people have to have realistic expectations. They can't jump out of the bus and get their nails done because they don't drive. All of those things, to each person, is very important. But in factoring in how this $250,000 is going to be effectively spent is really important to someone from town meeting. The final thing I'd like to say is to suggest that urban professionals might relocate here because of public transportation is difficult for me to accept. Because is it realistic to think that someone's going to get on the bus in Milford to travel to Holliston, to take the bus from Holliston, to take the bus down to Framingham, when there is Franklin, Ashland, and Southport, where they can park their cars and get on a train and get to their location in the financial district in the downtown Boston. But they can also drive, that's correct, but I'm just saying, if we're trying to appeal to that demographic, I think we have to be realistic about their expectations as well. Getting on a bus in Milford to go to Holliston, to go to Framingham, to get a train is a commitment of time. So those are the things that I think are important for people to have realistically evaluated and know before anybody votes and accepts this.
No, thank you, Mrs. Weimer. And I think, first of all, the amount of money being asked for because of the Chennai grant is $175,000 at town meeting. And I think a lot of what you bring up is what needs to be debated at town meeting, quite honestly. It's up to the board, who are the sponsors, as well as supporters and opponents to have that debate on town hall floor. I rely on public transportation every day to get to and from work. Granted, I do drive to Ashland, but right now there isn't another option. I also think that a lot of us are fortunate enough that we have multiple cars in our families, and things of that nature. So I think we're trying to attract people from across demographics. If one of my colleagues or Harold wants to take more information or provide more information to the things that you addressed, I think if nothing else, this is a start, and that's how we've always, or the year that I've been on and the year before that, paying attention how my colleagues and supporters and what proponents were asking for was, I don't think we would ever come out of the chute trying to put in an MBTA-like system immediately. So, if nothing else, this loop, people are going to have to schedule. They're going to have to realize that my appointment's here and the schedule is going to be important. And hopefully, Carl, if there's more questions about that, you can answer that. And I think it's also important to know that if town meeting votes in favor of this, then real negotiations start as well with the MWRTA, and further things start. So I think a lot more details will be worked out once town meeting takes place. The rates are fixed, so that is something that we can tell you right now. As for the routes, the stops, things of that nature, or the route and the stops on that route, again, is something that can be negotiated. Now, one thing that my colleagues spoke about a couple of meetings ago was their support for, regardless of how town meeting goes, to actually form a transportation advisory committee, which I think in itself is going to be very valuable. And hopefully that will lead and help support the MWRTA to decide and negotiate with what potential stops could be addressed and cut down on the time and things of that nature.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to answer was the first lady that asked the questions. We do offer a Boston Hospital shuttle. We offer it on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and it will be open to all Milford residents to go in there. It's $2 one way, and if you take a companion, it's $2 for the companion also. So for a round trip of $8, I don't know how you can get into Boston any cheaper. The other thing too is the question that this young lady had. We already have 2 buses that come into Milford now, and there are people that get on that bus in the morning and they return in the afternoon that go to the commuter rail in Framingham. Why Framingham? Because it's the easiest for our buses to tie into. We could offer the town alternatives, but it's going to cost more money to do that. So right now, what we need to do is walk before we run, see how it works out. If it does go through, and I'm hoping that it does, because I think that public transportation within the town of Milford is very much needed. Is it public transportation? Our average routes right now run about an hour from the origin to the end of the route and then back to where it started from. So the 45 minutes within the town of Milford is sort of an average of what we're doing now with other routes. We have 15 member communities in the MWRTA, Milford being one of them. And some of the towns have very long bus routes. The town of Marlborough, for instance, they go all the way from the Sudbury town line at the country store near Hager Street, it's called, in Sudbury, and it goes all the way to Solomon Pond Mall. As far as expense is concerned, a ride from Milford, once this gets implemented, to the commuter rail station will cost a senior with a senior Charlie card 70 cents, one way. And you also have it one way with one transfer in the same direction. So if you didn't want to end up at the commuter rail and you wanted to end up at the Natick Mall, that same ride, I could get you there for 70 cents. So as far as how much it's going to cost, it's relatively simple and inexpensive for seniors within the town of Milford. That also is the same for anybody with disabilities. Now the way our fares run now is, if you are a cash customer that goes on our bus, it's $1.50 for a one-way ride with one transfer in the same direction. If you have a Charlie card, which we stress wholeheartedly because of the fact 60% of our ridership has Charlie cards. And our Charlie cards are the same Charlie cards that are taken on the light rail T in Boston, or some people refer to as the colored lines, the red line, the green line, the blue line, silver line, orange line. So that if you got from Milford to the Natick Mall, that would be let's use it as a cash ride, that would be $1.50. To get from the Natick Mall, because we have a route that goes directly to the Woodland T station, that would be another $1.50 for you. For $3, I can get you from Milford to Newton for the Woodland T station.
And how long would that take?
It's probably going to take longer than if you rode in your car, but the 2 people that mention that they don't drive, it doesn't matter to them because they can get there.
It is, most certainly. Let me just answer that. I think it most certainly is a pilot program. And so there's a few things that I had to buy into, being, in my mind, at least fiscally conservative historically. I had to work through something that is very hard to do, and that it wasn't going to, as I said before, it wasn't always going to work out in a spreadsheet. So if we begin with the premise that it is a quality of life issue, which I have internalized in my thought process, if we talk about people who might not otherwise have options, and that's really a personal decision, how you process that, and to what extent you believe or don't believe it's an obligation of a community. I internalized it by thinking about the community where my grandfather was born, my father was born, and I was born, saying, this is a community that takes care of people. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. So once I get through those things, I'm able to say to myself, okay, now let's go into the brass tacks of the routes, who the experts are in transportation. I would offer that the MWRTA is most certainly a qualified expert in transportation with a demonstrated ability to deliver people with high quality of service, with very clean buses, with high quality, courteous staff. Those are the things I start to get into in the nuts and bolts of, and that's just my processing. So I'm letting you know my thought process, not the one you should have or anybody else should have. It's just mine. And as a community leader, an elected official, I look at that. What's the process that we would use in order to implement? And I realize that there's no way, and you know, if there are transportation experts here, I'd ask them to help me. Because for the science people here and the high finance people here, there's no empirical way that you are absolutely going to be able to say how many riders you get. So with any new implementation of a transportation program, and you can look it up, there is pilot phases. And there are phases that you absolutely need to go through in order to better understand it. Now, for the town meeting members who can't process that or think that a pilot phase and they want to deem it an experiment is unacceptable, then I would tell them to vote against it, because there is no way I know of in public transportation where you can start a line, survey enough, talk to enough people with the need until you go out and do community outreach. People begin to understand the process. I firmly believe that this will be months, and I venture a guess at 5 to 6 months before it gets real ridership, where people can begin to understand how it works, because there is education involved, and before families are able to understand how and when they can count on it. And I talk about families because when we talk about the people who might not otherwise have an opportunity, which is a segment of the population I think we're trying to reach. For anybody who has somebody in their family who's handicapped or especially challenged in any way, they know that that's a family issue. It's not an individual issue. And to the extent we've talked about it and I had to process it, I would argue that's also a community issue, because these are our community members. And if I'm not here for that, and again, I'm talking personally, I'm not talking how other board members or other elected officials or even town meeting members should vote. But if I'm not here for that, I'm not sure why I'm here. So that was just my thought process. And so for those folks that want to talk about an experiment, it absolutely is. Now, it is with some qualifications, the expertise of the MWRTA, right? With interviews of stakeholders. We haven't even talked about all the segments of the population, but I want to just hit on one right away, because it's one near and dear to my heart. My father was a career soldier and a career service member, and my mother served as well. We haven't talked about the veterans, how we get the veterans to health services in Boston. And unfortunately, the bulk of the services that are provided to veterans are provided in Boston. I think it's Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury. So when we talk about qualified experts, they make best estimates. So when we talk to our qualified expert, our veterans agent, and say to what extent might people utilize the service, we talk to our veterans agent. When we talk to the chairman of the Commission on Disabilities, when we talk to healthcare providers, we talk to the largest employer within the community, we talk to the Milford Hospital. So those are just some of the qualified experts that we bring as part of this process, and that you've heard for in various forms, heard from, that help us. But even with all of those qualified experts, I can absolutely assure you we are not going to be able to answer all your questions. And if that feels like a fumble to anybody from a community leadership standpoint, I'm not sure what to tell you, because people across the country in public transportation have tried to deal with this issue. And I'm certainly not an expert in public transportation, but I realize some of the challenges in being able to absolutely and unconditionally express what I think the ridership is. Additionally, and there's somebody here, the superintendent of schools, who's a qualified expert, in my opinion, and in the eyes of Westford as well, because they just took them from us, our superintendent of schools. So when we asked him to meet with his staff and talk to people about how the service might be a benefit to the community and the schools, to be able to get to either after-school programs or get closer to home if they're left behind. If parents that have to work, suddenly is there an opportunity for somebody to ride a bus to get to school if they've missed a bus? There are those opportunities, and I don't want to speak for him, but he certainly provided feedback talking about additional opportunities for students and public to gain access to the schools. We've also, another expert I would qualify as at the library. We talked to our director, Sue Edmonds, talking about what the possibilities are there. Now, each one a qualified expert, but none of them qualified experts on transportation. So I just wanted to say that. I know I was long-winded. I apologize for my long-winded answer, but...
Excellent. Mr. Visconti?
Thank you. My name is Mike Visconti. I live at 7 Milford Lane in Milford. I'm wondering if there was a cost comparison performed between the proposed service and, let's say, adding another senior center van to the lease we already have with drivers, which would double the door-to-door service that the senior van provides now, which I believe is what most people are looking for. Thank you.
Well, I'll start just by saying that why that wasn't a real option for me personally and as a board member, even though I think an additional van at the senior center is probably something that could be used over and over again. It doesn't service everyone. And we haven't just heard from our senior population, we've heard from our senior population, our student population, our disabled community, and advocates for all three of those groups. So our public housing advocates. So when we just look at the cost comparison of an additional van here at the senior center, those who could use it multiple times a day, it still only services one aspect of the population.
60 years old?
60. Jen?
I just want to speak on behalf of the students with special needs in the community. I've been an educator and an advocate for children with special needs for 30 years now. And the biggest challenge for these students is we do such a wonderful job until they're 22 and leave the system. And then they turn 22 and we're giving them all the tools to be employed and have quality of life. They turn 22 and they can't get anywhere. They can't go anywhere. They can't get a job. They don't have a ride. All these obstacles. And we do such a wonderful job in Milford Public Schools educating them and getting them to this point so they can have quality of life. And then they can't get where they need to go once they leave the system. So for me, I'm a huge advocate for the transportation for that reason.
Thank you, Jen. Rob?
Rob Mitchell, Precinct 2. I've heard a couple of new things tonight, so I'm glad that I'm here. Number one, the experimental aspect is something that's the first time I've heard it tonight. It was more or less rolled out as this is a solution. We have studied it, this is something that's going to work, and the fact that it's experimental and we are going to be looking at it in the future to see how well it performs, I think was discussed a little bit more tonight than it has in the past. I guess and the other comment of all of the costs in vans versus buses, I think that's a solution as opposed to what the problem is and what the actual solution is going to be. I guess my question is, 6 months from now, Bill, you talk about what we're going to evaluate. What is the criteria for evaluating? I haven't really seen what the problem statement is. I've heard, handicapped people, I've heard those that don't have rights. How are we going to know if we're succeeding or failing 6 months or a year from now?
And that's a great question. The metrics that the community would use to determine a few things. One, is the route working? And two, is the service provider the right service provider? Are there ways in which they can improve their service? Is there something unique about Milford? So let me just go back. So the metrics are important. We need to have metrics. There's no question about that. But I do want to go back to a comment and your question about the experimental nature of this. You know, sometimes I think that the elected officials think sometimes in their own mind, at least, that we've said things repeatedly and we've said them at each forum. I know that Brian, myself, and Will have talked about this as a one-year pilot program, right? And we've tried to repeat that in many different forums. I know there's probably, the FinCom can attest to hearing that extensively. And we think about those meetings being televised, those meetings being public, but that doesn't mean there's everybody here or in each audience is the same. So we think of it in our own mind. We've communicated it publicly. It's an effort to be transparent, and to the extent that we consider ourselves good communicators, there's probably lots of different ways we can do that and do it better. So I'm glad to hear this is the first time, because it's important that at each forum we repeat that to understand it. Another aspect of that pilot is the fact that we're negotiating with the MWRTA for the fixed bus route service that we can cut off at any time. And that's abundantly clear with the MWRTA. We make it clear to them and they make it clear to us. It's mutually understood. Not only understood, but stated. So if it's something that's not working out, and from my personal view, it would take me quite a length of time and a few efforts to improve the service before I were to want to hang it up. Because I think I talked about the learning of a community and what it needs to do. The metrics I expect to come out of community advisory, transportation advisory committee. I expect, and I'd like, you know, our board has not talked about it extensively. They understand the concept. They're all in agreement in concept, but the number of groups that can be represented within that advisory council should be talking about the basic things that transportation should look for. Courtesy of drivers, cleanliness of buses, timeliness of stops, the reliability of the vehicles, and whether they can count on it. One thing I've been told repeatedly by transportation experts, you can't expect a public transportation vehicle to go faster than the vehicles on the road. So if you were driving in your own car and you were fortunate enough to have your own car, you're not going to be able to navigate individually to Ashland or anywhere else any faster than this bus is going to be able to. So it suffers from the same challenges of congestion and whatnot. So the metrics, I guess, to loop back, the metrics we have to devise. And by the way, there's extensive research you can do and find metrics for good public transportation. They exist. I don't think we're going to invent new ones, because people do it every day across the country, and those are broadly available to everyone. I think it's just picking which 3 or 4 are most important to the community of Milford, and I think that's the advisory council that could offer that up.
Sir?
All right, well, I was expecting to speak tonight. I found out about this meeting at 6:30 tonight, and I looked at the number of cars in the parking lot. It seems like about a week drove here. I traveled here with my bicycle parked outside. I'll probably have to ride home in the dark. But there are many days during the winter I know I can't be getting a job. I have a leg injury, I'm retired, and I've been considering getting part-time jobs. There's no reliable way I can get around to any place throughout the winter. I ride my bicycle, but when you have 3 feet of snow, it's impossible to do. I live surrounded by many people who couldn't make it here tonight because they couldn't make it here tonight. They can't even ride a bicycle. So I think the services, to a good extent, to address those sort of people also. And it just seems that the question of service right now seems to be bogged down in the issue of experimentation. And of course, any project is going to be an experiment by its very nature, such as this. Just as it is going to be fluid. It's not going to be, well, this is specifically, technically how this is going to be. It has to ebb and flow with conditions and circumstances. That's the reality of life. That's the reality of programs. And when we had the bus service several years ago, when Marie Parenti was trapped and she was on the state finance committee, she brought home bacon. I don't know how she did it, but we had a big transportation line there. And at one time I had to utilize the transit bus to get to the Framingham commuter rail to go to South Station, to take the red line to the orange line, to go to South Station, to get the commuter rail to go up to Milford, where I worked. And if I got back late to Framingham, I had to take a taxi from Framingham back to Milford, which 20 years ago was pretty expensive then. And I'm sure it's almost twice the cost now. I go to the hospitals out at UMass Memorial, and if I could take a commuter train out to Worcester, I could hire a taxi at a low cost, and it would cost me here in Milford to get out to the hospital. Presently, I'm paying out of pocket someone to drive me out there at a lower cost than the cab company supported me. They told me that it's going to be $60 to $80 each way. And I just had to cancel a procedure just because of all of the follow-ups that were involved. And the cost of transportation. For many people around town who maybe in the middle of the day will say, oh, well, I need this, or I need that, or I have to go here, or I have to go there. There's no source for them to go to be able to go places around town if they don't have a car. And it doesn't matter quite so much that they have to wait maybe an hour if they're absolutely, totally, a long time ready to be picked up. A lot of people who are living in those circumstances really won't mind. They'll time their errands, they'll time their visits, and get out early and wait for the transportation to arrive. And it's not a problem to them. So it seems to me that a lot of the arguments and issues being raised are in opposition to the idea of having this transportation line implemented. And their premises for their arguments just seem to be somewhat faulty and from outside the areas of most concerned citizens and people who be affected by it. So that's just what I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Will, would you explain the rationale for the 13-hour day?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know if we've had that explained to us why it's specifically 13 hours. I don't know if you want to take that.
13 hours a day we figured would be a good service provider for the town of Milford. Most of the other towns have that 13-hour a day window too, from 6 in the morning until 7 at night. Now that can be adjusted at any time, so that if you wanted it later in the morning, it wouldn't service the commuters who want to get on a train if they were going to go to Framingham on our buses. Because right now, the bus comes into Milford, I believe the first one comes into Milford shortly after 6 in the morning to pick up people to go directly to Framingham. And the people that get on that Milford bus are not only commuters, but they're also employed by the one group of young ladies that I know of work in the housekeeping department at the Sheridan Tower. And this is their only way to get to their employment, is to take our bus in the morning. So as far as when we stop is entirely up to the selectmen if they wanted to change it around.
Okay, but we're not talking about that Route 6 bus. That is not involved in the article coming to town meeting. That Route 6 bus that you just referred to is going to continue regardless of whatever action the town meeting takes, correct?
Correct, but
Okay.
that will be
So
some
I want to
of
set that
the,
aside. The
but
question-
that's part of the 13 hours.
Okay. The question I want to ask is, aside from that Route 6 bus, where does the Milford bus meet the other bus coming from Framingham? The proposed route that was put out says Temple Beth Torah. You've mentioned Mission Springs and Holliston. I don't know the distance from the temple to wherever this area in Holliston is that's known as Mission Springs.
It's about 3/4 of a mile.
Okay. And at what time is that first connection?
The first connection will leave Framingham and come right into Milford. And then it will return, it will all depend. Let me just back up a little bit here. When we proposed the town of Wellesley, I know a lot of people say, well, Wellesley's not Milford. When we proposed the town of Milford fixed route, what we did was we implemented something, basically it was like a dartboard. And what the town of Wellesley and their transportation group did was they said, we want the bus to go here, 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 and we had to connect the dots. Similar to what we're going to have to do in Milford. But the Wellesley, what happened was they had two different routes. They had one bus, but in the morning they have what's called a commuter route. And in the mid-morning to late afternoon, they have a regular local route. And then later in the evening, they have another two commuter routes. So it's picking people up and dropping them off at the commuter rails in Wellesley. And there's actually 3 commuter stops in Wellesley, but we only go to 2. That's in downtown Wellesley and the one at Wellesley Hills. Now, what we've done since we implemented that program was, we have changed that route. So talk about experimenting if you must. We changed that route because of the fact was fine-tuning in times, going to areas that we went before that we didn't have to go to because we weren't getting any riders in. So that's something that both the selectmen and the MWRTA have to look at once it gets into effect.
Carl, why don't we have Harold answer that question?
You know, the gentleman, thank you. What was your name, please? Richard, your name?
Richard.
Richard, thank you. Richard, the actual auspices, if we go back to 2014, as to why in the position of the chairman of the Commission on Disability I got interested in this came from a discussion with our hospital. And we see Ellen Friedman over here, who has been leading a group called CHNA, which is responsible for putting together the Community Health Network Improvement Plan. So on that basis, recognizing that transportation access was very important, I had discussions with senior people at the hospital, asking them the question, what time would you like to have people here, for example, for one-day surgery or for at Dana-Farber? And they say their days start at 8 a.m. And I said, how long does it usually run for? And they say, we're usually done by 5 p.m. So it runs that kind of day. So between discussions with Ellen and others, really turned out to be my first goal was to make sure we serviced the hospital. It seems to me that one of the greatest lacking community caring is our ability to get people to the hospital. And I think we all know people who have great difficulties finding their way to the hospital for whatever reason. And Ellen's team did extensive and exhaustive study on this one subject. So where did we get 6 to 7. It first started because people needed to be at the hospital by 8. It continued past then because people get out of work, if they were taking it for work, at Milton Cat. You know, we have Terrace here for Milton Cat. They get out of work at 5:30. So they needed a bus that ran after that. So we were on the one side on the hospital and on the other side employment. Now there were lots of needs in between, but I hope that gives you the understanding as to why we did 13 hours. And I'm sincere in believing that is the right time frame for us.
I don't have any problem with 13 hours myself, other people express that.
No, I was talking to John back then.
Yeah.
Let me speak to you. Sorry.
I don't think my question got answered.
Yeah, you wanted to know how many stops or at what times would the bus be stopping and connecting to Hollis?
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Schedule hasn't been made.
Okay, so, let me go to that. We are currently working out different scenarios for schedules. It will be somewhere between, let's say, 11 and 15, 12 to 14 times, likely 13, okay? That's, you know, what we're figuring is at 45 minutes a route, maybe it runs to an hour. We're running 13 hours a day, we'll have 13 connections. So in that neighborhood of 11, 12, or 13, depending on the finalization of the route. And again, if that route schedule that we start with isn't optimal, like Mr. Buckley said, it'll be adjusted to what would be better, and we'll continue to get better at it. Did I do a better job now of answering the question? What would you like to know?
What Bill just said. Bill just stated.
The times we've been connecting to Hollis. We don't have the time.
We have not scheduled. The schedules for the service has not been put together yet. And it will be over the course of the month of June and into July. We've got a good idea of where we want to stop, but it's only a beginning. There's a lot of work that needs to go on to come up with that first really good route. But the schedule will be available as part of the travel training that the MWRTA will be putting together.
I gave a schedule to Mr. Valani tonight, along with our system map, that gives you the Holliston Route 6 schedule now, as it exists now. So it will show you how many times it goes to Mission Springs during the day. It doesn't go to Mission Springs early in the morning, because it's coming to Milford early in the morning. It doesn't go to Mission Springs late in the afternoon, because it's coming to Milford late in the afternoon. So we have to figure that to coordinate as to when now it's going to be going to Mission Springs, so that those buses can meet up together, so that somebody coming from Milford is not waiting an hour for the bus coming from Framingham to come into Hollis. So really that schedule has not been finalized.
Ellen, would you?
Hi everyone, I'm Freeman from hospital, also from SHNA 6, third forum I've attended. But what I did want to point out is something new did come out of this forum, which I think is something else to point out, and that is from this gentleman here that really, Richard, okay. To explain that people who are using this bus don't have other options. I mean, when we looked at the needs of the community in the SHNA 6, which is really looking at how to address health disparities, how to provide service for people who may not have the means or the ability to receive those services. We discussed transportation as a primary need, and not for everybody, but a primary need for people who aren't able to receive the services, access to services that many of us can do without that. And so, looking at transportation from the point of view of someone who doesn't have any other options to get places, it sort of removes the conversation from exact time the bus stops, how long the wait is. That was a really good point that I think only Richard could make. I don't have another option to get there, and I have to wait a few minutes. Yes, it's an inconvenience, but a lot of us aren't taking that bus. So, we kind of
Waiting 15 minutes is okay.
it's okay. I mean, I did say I was taking the bus from Hollis. I am going to try this. are the ones who really need it, and they're the ones who don't have any other options. And I think that was the mission of Mission 6, was to support those efforts to allow everyone to receive the services they need.
Thank you. Pat?
Pat Morrell, Milford Housing. I know that some of the questions tonight related to how many people are actually going to ride the bus. And the first time that Harold called me and asked me how many people are going to ride the bus, I don't know. So we sent out a survey to all of our families, elderly and disabled, because we have all of those people under our wing. We sent out about 325 surveys. We got approximately 100 back, which is a pretty good thing for us. And interestingly enough, 63 of those responses, our first question was, do you own a car? Because if you drive through our lot, you'll see about half of us people probably have cars. So 63 of my respondents said, yes, I own a car. But 93 of them said they would take the bus if we had a fixed route bus. So even though they have a car, they probably use it because they don't have an alternative. And we further went to say, well, how often would you take the bus? So we did choices of 1 to 2 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, 5 days a week, or 1 to 2 days a month. Just trying to get a better idea. And 41 said they take it 1 to 2 days a week. We had 40 of them that were going to take it 3 to 5 days a week. And then we had another 20 that thought they might take it 1 to 2 times a month. So we have at least 70 that are going to be riding it almost every day of the week. And we gave them some ideas of what they might like to use the bus for, you know, maybe to go shopping or get to work, go out to lunch with their friends. We tried to give them some other ideas because you're right, we haven't had regular public transportation that rides around town. So people can't even, they have to think about what would I be using it for or how could I use it. We had about half of them that were interested in being able to transfer onto the Framingham line because some of them work, some of them want to work, they can't find a job, they don't have a car. And some of our tenants made comments as well. Great service, thank you. It would be a great blessing to have the bus, as a lot of us don't drive and don't have a car. Also, for those willing to work, and transportation is stopping them from a great opportunity. Not having a license, I depended on bus service for over 20 years to get to work in Framingham. Now, with no service or taxi available, there's a sense of isolation because I have to depend on friends or family to get around. I need that feeling of dependency, bring back the service and my independence. And those are just a few of the comments. But I think it's a worthwhile investment in the community. And just from a personal point of view, I have a disabled son. He works in Hopkinton, and he had to get to Holliston from work. And I couldn't drive him that particular day, and he had to take the bus. So he had to take the bus 5 into Framingham and the 6 into Holliston, and it took him an hour and 10 minutes. But that he doesn't drive, so that was how he got around. So you know, it is for those of us that hop in the car and take the 15-minute ride from Hopkinton to Holliston or from Milford to wherever. It doesn't seem like that much, but for somebody that doesn't have another choice, it certainly is okay to have to wait 15 minutes or to hop on a bus and ride an hour because it brings back the independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Ma'am?
The key word here, she just said, independence. Because this would give a lot of dependent people their independence and they wouldn't have to be on the phone calling people all the time trying to get a ride to their office. I have a friend who's back in the generation who has to go to Mass General. She's on the phone all day long trying to find somebody that can give her a ride.
Thank you, ma'am. Jeff?
Thank you, Selectman Bouquet. I don't think the question is if we need transportation in Milford, because we all agree we do. The question is being raised by citizens of Milford, and the questions are being raised by many people here. And Harold said about the options. Harold looked at the fixed route and was 400,000. That's not the question. And I have the numbers from the Commission on Disability Board, and like Bill said, they talked to all the experts, John Pilla, 2 riders a day, 2. Superintendent Tremley, 5 to 10 people a day. 140 a day. So we're asking the town meeting to fund $250,000 for 140 riders out of 27,000, which, by the way, is not accessible to a lot of residents in Milford, even though they're going to pay for it. So the question is, and to Jen's thing, all right, maybe the clients Jen's talking about, is a van the better application for that? Was that vetted? We don't know. Or was that vetted out? We don't know. Was a van for Pat Morrow's people a better option? We don't know. We didn't see that option. Citizens from Milford put together a proposal that said, here's a van that can do these routes and can add people to it. We don't know those options, and I think for us to vote on $250,000 for a 5th bus route, I think is premature without seeing that all the other options are vetted with the players that are in the report. That's my take on that.
No, and I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you. I think, quite honestly, that in order to at least make an attempt to get to the different demographics of people that we're trying to serve, there would be a lot of different vans with a lot of different drivers and located at a lot of different locations throughout town, which would by far be more expensive. I think, again, this is why it needs to go to town meeting. It needs to be debated. You can't go to town meeting with 5 options because you'll leave with what you went there with. There has to be a healthy debate. Again, those of us that have vehicles and have transportation are in a position where we're never going to rely on public transportation or assume we're never going to rely on public transportation. This isn't going to affect us any differently. So I don't know if anyone else wants to take on that. I do want to just get to anyone who hasn't spoken yet. Father Mack?
It was 2012 when I took a sabbatical and I took 3 months, and one of those months was spent just going door to door throughout our community, including town hall, and coming to sitting at the MWRTA board meetings with our predecessor town administrator and John Fernandez to talk about the possibility, what would it take to bring some transportation to Milford. One of the things that I found in the door-to-door talks was talking to people, especially those who live in, we have about 35 shelter families, people that live in shelter in the Milford area. What's the #1 problem they have? And the interesting thing about that is when it was mentioned earlier, the hospital and the community health improvement plan, we did a survey through the plan of 1,000 or so respondents to the survey for local issues, and 77.4% affordable public transportation was the call. So that's just one aspect, and we started talking about this back in 2012, and it's now 4 years later, and we're getting to the point which I'm so grateful for, that we're town meeting on the 23rd is the opportunity to say yes. This last week and a half ago, for those that, there are now 17 community meals throughout the Milford area where we provide lunch or dinner for people, open door, no cost, come and eat. So I asked the question a week ago Wednesday. We had 127 people that came for dinner. Now this is a fixed sit-down, served meal. If you went to the restaurant and bought it, it cost you $40. You come to the church and it's free. I asked folks, first off, how did you get here? Well, I walked. Well, the nice thing about Trinity and that little bit of area that we live in Milford is that it's filled with rooming houses, and it's filled with people, a lot of people who the only appliance they have is a microwave oven if they have that. And the only fixed meal that's a good nutritious meal they get is when they come into one of these 17 meals. I ask them, how do you get it? They walk because they don't have transportation. How do you get to try and find the job that you need? Well, I can't. I don't have a way to get there, you know, or the bus that runs in the morning. You know, when we were looking at it in 2012, it was running capacity. I don't know if they're still running capacity, but it was at that point. And it was paying for itself because of that. But it was the only bus that got people to work if they needed to go into Boston or into Framingham. So those two pieces of information, for me, say this is critically important. It's critically important. And so, you know, the Milford Area Humanitarian Coalition got kicked off a couple of years ago, and that was the place where we looked at, you know, what are some of the key issues that we have to deal with in Milford that are really focused on the underserved. And the number one was transportation. It's always been number one. It continues to be number one. It's number one in the community health improvement plan. Number one, transportation. Number two was food security. Just knowing that I can get a good meal someplace and how to get the right kind of food. So these are problems that we're addressing, and I think they need to be addressed. And I hear we have two cars. I mean, my goodness, we don't need but we have two cars. But so you know, I drive to and the route system right now is not going to be coming to Hopedale. I live in one of those H towns, but the need today. One last. We're blessed in Milford to have a shelter for women and children that's available. It's interesting. It's the only shelter in all of New England that allows people to bring their pets. But this shelter has about 27 people living in it. And I was talking to the woman that runs the shelter today about her clientele. How do they get to work? Well, they call and find a friend. They call and find some way to get there. And transportation would be the thing that allowed them to have, one, to get out of shelter. How do you get out of shelter? You get a job. How do you get a job? You have to have the transportation to get there. And that, somebody said the word dependence versus independence. Yeah. I mean, that's the key to independence is the ability to get to and from, whether it's work or whether it's daycare or any of those things. And so, my prayers are for the opportunity to try this and to say, let's, you know, we do it for a year, and we say, you know, we do all those experiments about looking at sites and stops and all the places we need to go. I'm blessed. I'm one of those people that can call the senior center and say I need a ride because I'm over 60, right? So I get to do that. But all of those moms that have their kids that are living in shelter that can't do that because they're too young, but they need that help. Thanks, Father.
Thanks, Father.
I have no Jimmy and trouble walking. We need those buses.
Thank you. Tom?
I just want to endorse the fact that I completely endorse the need to expand public transportation in Milford, especially for those who are underserved. But to go back to some of the points that Richard made about him riding his bicycle to the meeting tonight, and other people that he knows who weren't able to do that or to even have the capability to walk here, and those are the people that I am concerned about, and that is part of the reason why I don't think that this proposal best meets the needs of some of our citizens. I think that more work needs to be done to look at other options. If those people that Richard was speaking of did not have the ability to walk or ride a bicycle here tonight, then how would they have that same ability to walk or ride a bike up to 2 miles to the nearest bus stop? And that is a need that we need to address. And can it be best done by having perhaps the fixed bus route, and in addition, another option that would give our dial ride program the opportunity to expand to meet those needs, because it's a safety issue that we need to be concerned about as a community. Also pointing to the mention of getting into Boston and to Worcester, I'm just
not clear on how this fixed inter-Milford loop would be able to, again, expand those needs into Boston and into Worcester.
Tom, I'll talk to you about that afterwards. Okay?
Well, it would be nice to have it addressed in this.
Okay.
No, that's fair. Donna, your first point, I'm just trying to start from the beginning. On your first point, I think that's something that the Transportation Advisory Committee is going to spend a lot of time with, even when the Citizens for Milford presented last night. That additional senior van dial-a-ride, I think is something that we've all talked about that is going to be part of the conversation. But again, we just need to crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run. As for the folks that can't or are not capable of getting to a bus stop, again, it's already designed, and I think it's by statute that, again, they would call and they would go off of the route to get to that person to pick them up, not because it's just a courtesy that we want to provide, it's also the law. So, I mean, that's even something that's going to be offered that isn't an option right now.
But it's my understanding that in order to have that service, you have to be an EDA certified rider.
Yep, and I think that is. So, would that be someone who qualifies for a disabled Charlie card? Okay.
I hate that. I want to finish that one more thing.
Sure, Bob.
Right. Only because last summer we ran a summer feeding program, a summer lunch program, and we fed. We just did it privately funded. We fed 2,200 kids. This summer we're expanding, and the area that we're servicing primarily is a 1 mile circle around the youth center, Memorial, Elementary, and Trinity. And within that 1 mile circle, we're expecting to feed about 500 kids a day, 20,000 meals this summer. A lot of the folks who, if you look at the census blocks for Milford, and this is the reason that we're focusing on this area, is that the census blocks color things by income and socioeconomic level, if you will. There's a butterfly that looks like with Trinity in the center of it that goes up West Street and goes over on School Street and Spruce Street in that area. That is what the census block considers poverty level living. Okay? All of that's within a half a mile walk at the most of any bus stop that we're talking about. And that's the clientele. That's the community that we're trying to serve. But that's one of the reasons we get 127 people to show up for dinner, because we're right smack in the middle of the poorest part of Milford. If you look at the rest of the census blocks around Milford, and you go outside and you head out to the edges, they're brightly colored because they're not red. and you have to come to that part of Milford and walk the streets and talk to. I invite people to come on the 18th of June. We're going to walk to every house in that 1 mile radius, and we're going to talk to people and hand them a flyer about the fact that there's a free lunch every day at one of those 3 locations, Milford, the Youth Center, and Memorial, and Trinity. But that's where this is an area of our community that many of us we just don't see. And the good news, I guess, is, from my perspective, is that I live right in the middle of it, and I work right in the middle of it. And so I get to talk to and meet with all of the people that live in that community every day. And that's us. That's Milford. And yes, we're outside. That's enough.
Folks, let's take a couple more questions just so we can start to close up.
I personally feel that the need has been demonstrated over and over and over. Listening to these folks and what they need. Clearly, there's a huge need in this town to get these people around. What I would like going forward from here is not to think in terms of something smaller or cheaper. My vision is for the town of Milford is, believe it or not, that this proposal is woefully inadequate. That's my belief after hearing all these stories. What does that mean? I think it means down the road that if we were to meet the needs of every individual in this town and what they really need, that this bus service could be so woefully inadequate that it's almost non-effective. So what I suggest is, I'd like to hear from the MWRTA. What would it cost the town to provide a service that you feel, after hearing these stories, would be sufficient to meet the needs of what father would like, what the individuals who have no cars would like, what the disabled would like, what the people. My vision is that if you really, really are serious about meeting the needs of the citizens of Milford, particularly those stories in this room, this could cost many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if that option were on the table at town meeting, the good people of Milford, who are beyond good in many ways, would say, you know, I'd rather spend $500, $750, or even $1 million, let's go crazy, $1 million, to make sure that Milford is to continue to be the good-hearted story that it is. I don't think $250, if you believe every one of these stories, and you could meet every one of these needs, $250 ain't going to do it. So there's one of the questions. The gorilla in the room, in my opinion, is it's not going to get any better by throwing a little at it. It might get better if you throw a lot more. And that type of experiment you might pull back from in the future. So I guess my question then, to summarize, is what, after hearing this and after sitting in these meetings with all these folks who need what they need, and they do need what they need, what do you really think is the financial solution based on what you see in Milford? And it's unique. Milford is very generous. I've been in this town almost 50 years. They've never walked away from their responsibility, ever. Maybe to a fault, but they never have. So if you properly propose a solution that everyone can believe will really, really work, maybe it could surprise you what this town would do. They might get up and say, yeah, $250, and what about this $500,000 proposal? You've got 3 buses running around town, and maybe the route of one is different than the route of the other. A comprehensive plan, as opposed to, gee, what can we do for a couple of grand? That's maybe where I'm coming from after hearing some of these folks who really have these.
Judge, and I, for one, appreciate what you're saying, and I will certainly hand it over to Carl, but I do think we need to start somewhere. And I think, you know, again, if there's no options, we at least need to see what our first option would bring. I'm going to hand it over to Carl to address this, and then I'd like to know if Brian would like to say anything before we leave, and then we can get some of these people home at a reasonable time.
I appreciate your generosity, but I think, in all honesty, for what we have sat down and what Harold has done as a plan for transportation in Milford is adequate to start. I really do. One of the things this gentleman, you know, year-round is not convenient for him to ride his bike to a bus stop, but all of our buses have bike racks on them. So if he lived 5 miles from the closest bus stop to his house, he'd be able to ride the bike and pick up the bus, and the bus would put the bike right on the front of the bus. But to jump into sort of a champagne budget, I don't think it's adequate to start at that point. Maybe what we do is, let's go for a year, see how it works. We'll be talking with the transportation group in the meantime at different points in time. And at that point, what we can do is come back next year and say, we'd like to add another bus. So what we would do is the loop that might be sort of set up. Let's go back to the schedule of that I first presented in our very first forum was to go around Milford. It would take an hour and 15 minutes, I believe it was. But if we had another bus in Milford, and right now just double what Milford needs to do to have another bus within the town, but it would probably have it similar to the town of Framingham and Natick, where they have what's called loop routes. The most efficient type of route is a line route. A line route, for a perfect example, would be the MBTA has a train that goes from Worcester to South Station. That's a line. If that train also went up to the North Shore and swung around and came back down to Worcester and kept going in a circular motion, that would be a loop route. But it's more efficient to run a line route, but to hit all of the areas that would be beneficial to all the people in this room that was saying that we need to have it go here, 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 and here, the loop route will work. It will end with a line route because it's going to take a trip into Holliston to meet up with the Holliston Route 6 that goes to Framingham on a regular basis, 13 times a day. So what we need to do is, if we had 2 buses in Milford, one would go clockwise and the other one would go counterclockwise, so that at some point in that loop they would meet up. And it would also cut down on the times, because now that trip that you were taking is going to take a half an hour as opposed to 45 minutes or an hour. So in all honesty, I think what we're doing to start is adequate. I think the selectmen have done a fantastic job. They've done their homework in looking at what would benefit Milford the best. Now, I'd just like to mention one thing, and then I will yield the mic to if Brian wants to say something. But I do a lot of outreach at senior centers in all 15 of the communities. And the thing I do is I take a young lady from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and what she works in is transitioning people who can't have their license anymore. Either their kids or the police because they had an accident, or the registry feels, or the doctor. The doctor is the biggest one, takes their license away from them. And I know that there are probably a lot of people that are of my age, because I'm 66. And if you ever had to give up your license, it would be easier to cut their legs off than take their car away from them. And I don't mean that in a joking manner, because you just took away their independence. So what we do is we travel train them so they can take the fixed route buses in the other communities that have fixed routes, and we train them to get on the bus so that they can do their own grocery shopping and they don't have to rely on their daughter or their neighbor. They can go clothes shopping. They can go Christmas shopping for their grandchildren. They can do whatever, but they can still get out of their house. Because if they didn't get out of the house, they'd be sitting there all day watching TV. And then something like the program that Father has with the meals, I'm sure that Milford has Meals on Wheels, because I don't know a community that doesn't. But that's the only meal that they depend on. Because it's convenient for them not to do anything. So I think it's very important for public transportation in Milford. And the choice is going to be on the 23rd. And I hope that I don't have to get up and talk on the 23rd. And there are a lot of people with a basket of tomatoes there. But if need be, I'm hoping that my administrator will be there and we'll let him do all the talking.
Thank you. I'd like Brian Murray to come up. I also want to pass along that Bill Buckley had to leave. He had a conference call with China, and he asked me to pass that along to you. Felt bad about leaving. Thank you, Will. Let me reiterate, Kyle, there's a lot of us that don't want to hear you speak on the 23rd. So let me just thank everyone that came out here for this informational session. Couple of things I want to say, as I was sitting in the back kind of listening to the concerns, the expressions, it brought me back to a time when we were looking to do something very radical in the town of Milford. And it's a different type of service, but it's a service nonetheless, and that was the bike trail. That was the recreational trail. A lot of these concerns that I'm hearing were the same things that were talked about the bike trail, but we can't have that. There's going to be crime on it. How much is it going to cost to maintain? Well, we want senior citizens to use it. We want young people to use it. If that's the case, how long is it going to be? We fought through all of that.
The town of Milford, I think, was very visionary in creating that trail. It leveraged certain funds, and to be honest with you, that's probably one of the most popular items and healthy items that this community has, and I think it's one of the best in the state. Public transportation, a little different. We're behind the 8 ball on it. The MWRTA started in 2007. They've been looking for Milford to join since that time. There were some individuals here that have left that wanted to know how we're going to rate this, the metrics. You know, I don't like all of these fancy new wave words. To me, it's very simple. You find out whether or not people are riding the bus. You ask them whether or not they like the bus. That's the review I need. I don't need all of these measurement sticks and all of this stuff. If we've got people on the bus and it's working, I think it's successful. So, a couple of things going forward. Yes, this is experimental. Yes, it is a pilot. Yes, we don't have all of the answers, but we're starting. There's enough information out there. There's clearly a segment in the population that needs this. It's in all other towns. So it ought to be in the town of Milford. Going forward, I think we have to keep it simple. I think the bus route needs to be simplified. We've got to get our basic stops down. We've got to crawl before we can walk. I think the Board of Selectmen has to commit to a set time frame to review this. I would say every 60 days. I don't think the review has to be complicated. It doesn't have to be anything more than, like I said, are people using the bus and is it working? I think going forward, we have to realize that it is a pilot program, it is reviewable after a year, and there's no guarantee that it's going to continue. If we look at it and 2 people are riding the bus, maybe that's not something that we want to continue. But if we look at it and we have full buses all day long, then I think it's been a good investment. We're not going to know unless we try. And I really think that we ought to. So for everyone here, if you're interested in this, either pro or con, please come to the town meeting. If you're not a town meeting member, but you live in the town of Milford, you're allowed to speak. If you don't live in the town of Milford with permission from the moderator and the body, you can speak. All of you have the right to speak. All of your opinions are valid. All of your opinions count. And that's how the decision is going to be made. So to all of you, thank you for being here, and have a good night.